afternoon, everybody. I hope you enjoyed lunch, and I'll try and see if I can make it interesting enough so you won't fall asleep while you try to digest your food. My name is Peter Hafez. I'm the Chief Data Scientist at Ravenpack. We are a big data analytics company with expertise in natural language processing. We've been around for almost 20 years, so we have been sort of one of the pioneers in the NLP space for finance. We are probably best known for analyzing news, earnings calls, transcripts, and so on. But recently, we entered into a partnership with LinkUp, a company who has expertise in human resource management and in employment data. And we have engaged with them to apply our NLP technology on top of job posts such that you can extract information about, let's say, skills and benefits and so on, and apply that to alpha generation. So as part of my talk, I'll talk about how you can apply job analytics and workforce intelligence to generate alpha. So what's the case for job postings? Why are job postings potentially interesting? Well, it gives you an opportunity or a window into how companies are doing or performing. It can give you an idea of their business growth, their financial health, but also perhaps what does their innovation roadmap look like? And also potentially, what are the strategic orientation of the company? A lot of the things that they're doing can be reflected in the types of people that they are looking for. So it may well be that a company is talking about, quantum computing in a press release, or they talk about how they invest in blockchain technology and so on, or even ESG for that matter, that they are becoming much more focused on sustainability. But when you start to look at the types of people that they hire, are they actually hiring people with those skills to back up these new initiatives? Or are they really just playing the media theater? And jobs postings data is very interesting and for these types of applications. What you can't read here with the light is actually just some of the things that you could go ahead and ask a data set like this. I can sort of try to read out a couple of them just to give you a sense. For instance, did the UK see a decrease in trade job openings after Brexit? Does offering education benefits speed up the hiring cycle in Chicago? When did the hospitality business start hiring again? What are the top 3 skills currently required for a full-stack developer? What does a technology VP look like at JP Morgan versus Goldman Sachs? You can start to make these type of comparisons and look at the various businesses. So why did we partner up with LinkUp? Well, first of all, they've been around for more than 20 years. And that's quite powerful. We cater a lot for quants, but also, of course, for discretionary traders. But often, when you look at this type of, or one of the challenges that you have with new data sets is that they don't come with an archive. But with LinkUp, we were able to get 15 years of data of jobs. They have been scraping corporate websites for 15 years. So a deep historical archive. They track 60,000 companies globally, and there are more than 200 million job posts available. So it's a massive data set. And they do it globally. So why job analytics as opposed to job postings? Well, one of the things that Ravenpack basically brings to the table is our NLP engine. If you look at LinkUp, they have been, as a company, they have been working with financial firms, but they have been giving or handing out or been selling more of the raw transcripts. They also have some analytics that talks about, what companies are hiring. So you can sort of do basic counts of job posts. You can look at perhaps a position associated with that, and also a location. But what we do at Ravenpack with our NLP engine, we go in and structure the entire job posts, so also the job descriptions. And that is, as I mentioned before, it allows you to dig into sort of the qualification sections or the education section or the benefits section and compensation sections to get a much broader read of what's going on. And we have also made the 200 million job posts searchable. So that means that you can come up with your own hypotheses, your own keyword baskets of things that you could be interested in, and generate your own time series of data to look at exposure matrix for some of these. And that could be, again, as I mentioned, let's say I want to understand vaccine mandates. You know, how many companies are still requiring that people are vaccinated? How many companies are looking for remote work versus in-office work and so on? How is that reflected in their job post? Often you'll find that in the description. So with the RavenPack engine and being able to take advantage of the RavenPack knowledge graphs, where we track 12 million entities globally. We do it across very granular locations. When we have that running on job posts, we can give you a much deeper set of sort of detailed analytics. So we are able to associate all of these hiring locations in a much more granular scale, down to city levels and so on. So we have about 140,000 detected hiring locations across the archive. We also have great apply various mappings to tradable universes, ICE and CEDOS and so on. And if you look across some standard universes in terms of coverage of this type of data, yes, it is a little US tilted. And we do have about 90 to 95% coverage across the top 1,000 US companies. The number is more like 60% for the top 1,000 in Europe, but it's a number that is going up or has been increasing over the last few years. And it's an area where we are actively working with LinkUp to sort of increase the universe and also globally. Asia is not necessarily super high in coverage at the moment. So what are the things that we're also doing? I mean, I've been talking about all of these, mentioning skills and benefits, qualifications, employment policies, duties and responsibilities. But a lot of it is, we like taxonomies. We like taxonomies and we like being able to track relationships. So we want to make it easier for our clients to work with the data. So we have created purpose-built taxonomies of what we like to call job topics and also a job positions taxonomy. So you have different levels of granularity. So you can go very deep into a particular position, but you could also aggregate it up to saying just salespeople, as opposed to sales engineering or I don't know, pre-sales or whatever kinds of more granular sales positions that exist. You can sort of roll it up and create indicators to capture certain parts of the companies much more easily. And the same on the job topics taxonomies, you can go very granular into benefits or skills and so on, but you could also roll it up into soft skills, technical skills, technology skills. So we're building out all of these taxonomies and delivering those at, as I mentioned, different level of granularity. In terms of volume, looking for the job taxonomy, not the positions taxonomy, but at the job, skills, benefits, and so on. From the archive, we have been able to generate 500 million of data records since 2014. While the archive goes back to 2008, the full job descriptions becomes available from 2014, and since then we have generated more than 500 million data records. So it's a massive data set. As you can see here from the red area, that's the qualification parts. A lot of it is associated with qualifications. And within qualifications, skills makes up 2/3. And again, within skills, about 50% of them are soft skills. And then there's sort of an equal split between technical skills and technology skills. So if we sort of look at some of the use cases, I mean, it's a great data set for storytelling. And there are clear applications for discretionary investors. My presentation will primarily focus on quant use cases, but just to give you an idea of some of the work we're also doing on the discretionary side, which obviously also can be applied to quant, is, I mean, it's not just about companies. There's also information about the macro environment, right? So you can roll it up and saying, you know, what are the sectors that have the greatest hiring growth at the moment? Or the ones that are pulling the most the job posts from the market. Not surprisingly, what we're observing right now is the technology sector is being hit pretty hard. I mean, it's not that surprising. We have seen a lot of layoffs and so on. But what you tend to see is that job postings, the first thing that companies do is that they pull their job posts first before they start firing. And it's often when people lay off, or companies are laying off, that's when it hits the news. So it's interesting to sort of see the interaction there. But you can roll it up into sector level, you can roll it up into state level, you can roll it up into market level. And now suddenly you start to have something that is also interesting, more of a nowcast or a real-time read on unemployment data, non-farm payroll or JOLTS data and so on. You can even go in and track what is the number of how long does it take, or how long is a job post active? How long does it take before it gets pulled or deleted from the website? That could give you an indication of, you know, what kind of pressure is there on the jobs market. If it takes a long time for companies to hire, it may actually indicate that negotiation power moves in the favor of the employee, and there could be a salary pressure. So perhaps with the inflation environment that we're in, we can see that it also takes a long time to hire, perhaps that will actually impact salaries to with much higher probability than if we start to see it sort of becoming easier to hire. And that might happen if we start to really go into a deep recession, that it becomes easier for companies to hire, and therefore it pushes the negotiation power in the hands of companies. So there's a lot of interesting macro applications. It could also go into looking at trends. As I mentioned before, you know, are companies generally looking to get people back in the office, or are people embracing flexible work, and the COVID mandates and so on as well. Here at the bottom, I'm actually showing, it's not a pointer, we're showing sort of the year-on-year change in jobs posted in the US. And you can clearly see here that COVID, there weren't that many open job postings. Then you saw like a recovery, aggressive, and then we are sort of not looking so good again. Of course, the year-on-year sort of will do that because you're comparing it to a high level. But you're seeing very intuitive results, generally. Here's one on companies. So you could, of course, do something similar, plotting company data. Here we have again shown year-on-year hiring growth for Amazon. We have split Amazon by subsidiary because of our knowledge graph. We link about 7 million companies. That also means that we are linking subsidiary structures. And one of the things that was interesting when we started looking at Amazon was that, of course, they hire a lot of software engineers, as you can see here in top 10 positions. But the second one is food specialists. And then we're thinking, why is Amazon hiring food specialists? So of course, in order to really understand that, you need to break it up into subsidiary structure and saying, okay, 23% of all hires are Whole Foods, right? That is owned by Amazon. So you sort of get some interesting insights here. And you can see, you know, here in terms of change, where have they seen the biggest drops in hires? Well, warehouse workers, stockers, food specialists, operation managers, and so on have seen some year-on-year negative changes, even though they're still perhaps relatively high up on top positions. And again, you can break that down into locations as well. We are taking advantage of some of this information in the quant strategies that I will show as well. Here, we have started looking into the skills sections. What can you do around skills? You can see selected skills over time by sector, selected skills over time for the entire US. Here we focus on cloud compute. You know, what are the requirements in job postings from companies in various industries when it comes to AWS, Google Cloud, or Microsoft Azure experience. And as you can see, if you look at technology services, most job posts actually look for Microsoft Azure experience as opposed to AWS and Google, where you can see AWS is probably more on par with Microsoft Azure in electronic technology. So you can start to sort of compare and across industries if certain companies have perhaps potentially a bigger market share there. You could also go into job characteristics. Here, this is really the vaccine mandate example that I talked about earlier, that it was very clear that in November 21, there was a massive sort of increase in requirements for vaccine, but you have sort of seen it taper off a little bit. And it's obviously going to be interesting to see how much is vaccines still playing or driving the narrative in the job market. How quickly will it taper off? And again here, you can split that down to by sector. You know, is it communication is the one where it tends to appear the most, electronic technology, commercial services, and so on. In finance, they don't seem to care that much. Only 1.5% of job postings talk about vaccine requirements. So let's try and scale it up. That's where the quant enters the room. So some of the research that we have done, we just put out a research paper recently where we took two different directions. We looked at hiring growth in different ways, and we looked at going deeper into the job descriptions, also to look at job qualifications and skills. And there's obviously, as I've already mentioned, there's many things we can do, and you can expect to see a lot more papers coming from us. We are really excited about the data set. It's a lot of fun to work with. And also, to be honest, I'm quite happy to, personally, to have other data sets that are not news to work with. I've worked with news data now for 14, 15 years. It's interesting to look at something different as well. So that's more from a personal perspective. But it's very rich. It's very rich, and you can be really creative with the data, and it's fun, and it generates alpha. That's of course also important. So let's first look at does hiring growth drive alpha? It does. So what we found was looking across the top 1,000 US companies in this case, that if you go along the companies with the 20% of companies with the greatest hiring growth, they tend to outperform the bottom 20 companies with the least or negative growth, the least growth. We do find that it's important to sector adjust, so it's sort of like rank by sector and then pick top and bottom 20. We're able to get an information ratio about for about a 1 week holding period. So that was sort of the first thing we did. And then we started looking at perhaps we can try to come up with a better measure. So perhaps we could start to look at location and saying, does it matter where they hire? And what we found was, which was somewhat interesting as well, and to some it can be counterintuitive, but what we found, we saw clearly that if you look at the top 20% that were hiring the most, so they were generally growing. Where were they growing? Were they growing in existing locations, or were they growing in new locations that they hadn't been hiring in before? And what we found was that companies that hire into existing locations outperform companies that hire into new locations. And our interpretation of that is that when you hire an existing location, you hire to meet demand. But if you hire into new locations, you hire to create or try to create new demand. So it has a much more risky profile associated with it. And that seems to be reflected in performance. So when we sort of overlaid and said, we created these vectors of location vectors and looking at distances. So we call it similar locations because it's more like a statistical distance measure in these location vectors. When we started overlaying that, we were able to get an even better signal out of it, as opposed to just looking at raw growth. We were able to enhance the information ratio, not necessarily that much, but to 1.1, but we were able to improve returns by about 50%. In fact, we are rerunning all of this because we are seeing benefits in cleaning up the way we measure jobs growth in the first place. So here we are just counting job postings, but we are translating this now into what we call active jobs. So we look at, in a rolling window, how many active jobs are there. So we also look at deletes as opposed to just counting. And that gives you a significantly cleaner signal. Some of these signals that are generating 1.1 are suddenly jumping to 1.7. So it's quite significant. So active jobs is a better measure, but not reflected in our research yet. But that will definitely be part of the next research piece. So the other thing we also looked at was to say, perhaps it's not just about hiring growth. Perhaps we can identify certain positions that matter more. So we started to look at what kinds of positions can define an industry. So we looked at what were the positions that most companies in an industry were hiring for, and then we said that's the position that this sector is all about. And let's look at the growth for those top positions instead of overall growth. So if you are an engineering company, it matters more if you hire more engineers as opposed to when you hire, a receptionist or someone in your finance team or admin team. It's all about your core business. So am I growing my core business? And we're able to clean up the signal even further compared to the raw growth number. Again, an increase to 1.2 and also a nice improvement to annualized returns. So that's sort of the work we did within hiring growth for now. And I'll come back to how you can combine them as well. But we also started to look at what about job qualifications and skills? Are we able to find any alpha there? So, and here's a repeat of the previous slide with a little extra. We decided to focus on soft skills initially and started digging in there because that's really where most of the volume is. So from our jobs topics, taxonomy, are qualifications, and within qualifications, most of them are skills, and then within skills, 50% of those are soft skills. So we focus there. We've also done a little research. We are digging in deeper in our current research into skills and benefits and so on. And we can see that technology skills, companies that hire more technologists or more STEM tend to outperform those that hire fewer STEM. We can also see that companies that provide more benefits typically are outperforming companies that are providing fewer benefits. And we are also interested in looking at what if companies start cutting benefits and what happens then, because that's obviously a way to save some money relatively easily or quickly. So what you will see now is focusing on soft skills, and the way we look at it is could it be I jumped a little ahead. So first what we did was we just looked at qualifications overall, and then I look at soft skills. But first we looked at qualifications. Do companies that hire for a more diverse set of qualifications, do they outperform companies that hire for a less diverse set of qualifications? And we find that to be true. So companies, so you see a nice outperformance, again, information ratio about 1.1 with a 1-week holding period and annualized returns in similar sort of range as we have seen with the other strategies. Of course, this strategy will have some correlation to the growth strategies, because if you hire a lot, you are more likely to hire across a broader set of qualifications than if you hire very little. It may be more targeted. So there is definitely some correlation, but we did find that combining the various strategies, there's enough uncorrelatedness that that you get some nice sort of orthogonal alpha there. So we sort of went this direction, and now I will get back to your soft skills. So what we tried to look at was, okay, I mean, there's many different ways that a job position can be described. I mean, we have seen some very creative ways of talking about jobs. I mean, a chef can be a culinary expert or something like that. So perhaps what's interesting is to say, let's not focus so much on the position, but let's focus on the skills that they try to hire and create skill vectors instead. And we saw that there were some clear patterns. So here we have shown 3 different sort of types of occupations, broader-based occupations. On the left side, we have architecture and engineering. In the middle, computer and mathematical occupations. And on the right-hand side, we have sales and related occupations. And you can clearly see here, if you look at sales, I mean, people like teamwork, motivation and leadership, and at the bottom, communication skills, very important for a salesperson. But if you look at math and computer occupations, okay, there's an other, so that's like a little catch-all, so I'll talk about something else. There's innovation, there's discipline, collaboration. Okay, they also need to be able to communicate the results, perhaps with the rest of the organization. Architecture and engineering, discipline is also highly encouraged, and so on. So you can perhaps look at these skills vectors as a way of sort of, as a different way of representing the hiring needs of companies. When we sort of looked at these skills vectors and started to look for similarity in skills, are they hiring for sort of existing skills or you can call them almost like core skills versus new skills? What did you see? And we actually saw something very similar to a similar conclusion as we saw to locations, that companies that hire into core skills, the skills they tend to look for again and again and again, tends to outperform companies that hire for new skill. So again, that could also be linked to new innovative projects that have a lot of risk associated with them as opposed to hiring for the core business. And again, there's an alpha, and it's actually a much slower alpha. So here, again, an information ratio about 1, but now we're talking about a monthly holding period. So it's a slower moving alpha. And in fact, some of these strategies can be extended, and we have seen that you can sort of add value also even to tilting portfolios that may have a quarterly rebalancing frequency. So they are much slower moving. And in fact, when we started combining all of this data together into an overall sort of strategy, you get this performance. So information ratio above 1.6. So there is enough sort of uncorrelatedness, as I mentioned, to have value in different kinds of alphas here. That's with a 2-week holding period. And even with a 1-month holding period, you still have information ratios above 1. And as I mentioned, we have found other measures of hiring growth that also looks at deletion, so more active, that gets even better. So one question we might ask ourselves is that, are we loading up on any factors here? And if we look at it from a factor-adjusted basis, we can see not really. Of course, there's a little load up. So not so much in the short term from an information ratio perspective. Yes, you do remove a little bit on return side. And as the holding period starts to, in fact, sometimes the factor-adjusted returns are cleaning up a little bit some of the on the vol side. But of course, as you increase your holding period, you start to load up a little more on factors, but not that dramatic. So you're only falling from or dropping from about information ratio of 1, a little more than 1 to 0.9. So it's not that dramatic. So there seems to be some interesting information that isn't capturing, that isn't just captured by factors. And in fact, if you look at the factor loading, the average factor loading is about 5%. But it can move between plus minus 0.25, something like that. So the key takeaways at this stage, and then I'm happy to take questions, is hiring growth is a strong signal for identifying companies that are likely to outperform or underperform. And these signals can be improved if you also consider hiring locations. Looking at the concept of top positions seems to be an even better measure for focusing on hiring growth, because it's really about the core business of a given sector. And therefore you get a cleaner signal that way. And there's also a lot of interesting potential signals that you can create from skills and benefits, skills and skills diversity and qualifications, an area that we are currently tapping into to a much greater extent. We are seeing in early research that hiring for similar skills companies tend to outperform companies that are hiring for new skills. That's it from me. As I mentioned, happy to take questions.
Oh.
Yeah, okay, so I'm just a little bit of a background. I'm a quantitative finance recruiter. So I'm working with job postings pretty much all day, every day. So one thing I found is that with a lot of companies that we work with, prospective clients, that they always have job openings on their website, even if it's not up to date, just so that they're constantly getting talent. So there could be, let's say, a quant researcher role that's up there. They could be looking to hire 10 quant researchers. They could be opportunistically looking. Thank you.
So how would you say that affects?
Yeah.
How would you say that this affects the data that you're using based on the growth of the hiring? If I guess the information on the internet isn't always completely accurate. And also even in regards to salaries, for example. I mean, in certain spaces, the salary that's posted online could be their base salary, and I'm sure many of you have seen as well, the base salary doesn't always reflect the total package. I mean, you could be making, let's say, 150 on the base salary, 50K on the bonus if you're a bit more junior. And again, my expertise are specifically in the quant space, and then you could be making 150 on the base, and you could be making over $1 million. And on the website or on the roll, it could just say 150K is the salary.
Yep. Yeah, it's a good question and a very valid question. I tend to say that, I mean, how much emphasis should I put on a number as opposed to a growth? Because it's more about perhaps the trends and so on that are interesting as opposed to looking at an exact number. And the same goes with salaries and salary ranges and so on. I mean, you can combine that and say, okay, there is a bonus structure here. So I know that there's a base salary and there's a bonus structure. Of course, you might not necessarily know what that will be reflected in the numbers, but can I see a general trend, at least in the base? That might also tilt in on the bonus components, that if the base goes up, you are probably also belonging to a higher bonus range. Of course, what will be more difficult to track is if companies are trying to keep the bases low and pay more in the bonus compensation, because that's something you can adjust more easily from one year to another if things are not going well. It's not going to capture everything, but it's going to give you an idea of trends. And in respect to your sort of your opportunistic, always open hire, that's also where I started to introduce the idea of looking at active jobs, because you can sort of look at how long has this job position actually been open. You know, if it's just been there for 3 years, perhaps you want to degrade it and say, no, I don't want to count it anymore. Right? That's where we have sort of started experimenting with doing like a rolling 3-month or something like that, and saying if it's still there after 3 months, if it's still there after 6 months, then don't count it anymore. So you can start to experiment with that, and you get a better proxy, because at the end of the day, these are only just proxies like with everything else. It's not exact. It's never exact. But there are ways to sort of address that. And in terms of sort of the quality and so on, I think that's also one of the uniqueness of the link-up data set is that they go straight to the corporate websites. It won't necessarily address these sort of opportunistic opens, but they are definitely more timely because as a company you have a greater integrity around the job post that you put out there, that you don't want 50 things where you're not really hiring for it, because you're also trying to protect your brand amongst people. So if people sort of say, they always look for this position and they never get back to me, or because there's administration costs there. So they try to make the corporate websites as reflective of the true hiring needs as possible because of that, as opposed to if you go to job boards or something like that, where they have a different incentive structure, a different model. It's like, how many of you have not gone to an apartment rental website, and they always have great apartments, and then when most of them are not really available anymore, but they need to keep the good jobs, the good apartments there just to drive traffic to the website. And also, it's not like companies are calling up and saying, hey, we have now filled the position, you can bring it down. They don't care, but they will maintain their own corporate website. So it's a cleaner data set when you go for that.
I have a question for you. So two questions maybe. So maybe you mentioned, maybe I missed it, about the coverage in terms of geographies and languages. Is it US focused or it's broader? That's important, I think. The second one, you're explaining here the corporate point of view in performance if you create a strategy on corporates and so on. But this has huge macro implications. Yep. For example, inflation, it's a big topic as of today. So there's been a shock coming from food prices, oil prices, and so on. So the next big question is, are there going to be any shocks from the labor market? Because this will further determine there will be pushing inflation or not. So wage renegotiations, so pushing inflation higher and so on. So do you use this data set to answer macro questions like that?
Yeah, so I tried to sort of mention it a little bit in as part of my talk. I think there are some very interesting macro applications. It's a relatively new data set for the research team as well. So we haven't tapped too much into sort of applications there, but early in the new year, we're definitely going to do more around non-farm and so on. And we have also been building inflation models, and I think it can be an interesting input as well. I know you guys are interested in that too. But yes, as I mentioned, this sort of negotiation power and being able to see where the negotiation power goes, if it's between the employee and employer, will be very relevant in those perspectives from that point of view.
Definitely agree. Thank you. Any other questions for Peter?
And the ones that just came in, you can just make up one. So just to guess what the topic was.
No, definitely great work, great data sets. Having an in-depth analysis of the labor market, for the future for macro, it's going to be very, very important. Okay, thank you very much, Peter. We have you.